This screencast is going to go over an example of input validation, specifically using a do loop in VBA. So we want to create a sub in VBA that will use a do loop to ensure that the user inputs a positive number y using an input box, and then the sub is going to display y squared in a message box. The first thing we want to do is to draw a flowchart, and then we're going to implement that flowchart directly into VBA code. Every flowchart begins with start. What I like to do is I like to have a list of the variables that we're going to dim. And if we're working with input validation, one of the first things we need to do is to set up a loop. So that's just a small circle, and we know that something's going to come back around to intersect with that circle. So the first thing we need to do is obtain input from the user. So the user is going to input y. We know that we're going to have to dim y, so I add that to my list of things that we need to dim. So the user is going to input y. The next step is to make sure that y is positive. So is y positive? So that is a decision, a logical, which is a diamond. If that's true, we're going to exit the loop. If it's false, we might have a correction message. So this is a message box that's just saying that y must be positive. And then we go back here, we keep going. So now we're going to input y again, and we loop until y is positive, and then the last step is just to message box y squared. So that's an output. And then we end. There are a couple ways to do these loops in VBA. The most popular is do loop. In this, whenever you set up a do loop, there has to be some sort of condition that will become true so that you can exit the do. If there is not this line, then you'll be in an infinite loop forever. So we would have the input here. I'm just going to put kind of generic input y up here. Down here we would have a message box. So we obtain the input from the user. If y is greater than 0, so we're going to put the greater than 0, then we're going to exit do. So that's how you can get out of here. And then if this condition is not satisfied, then we're going to display the message box that says your value for y must be positive. And then we go back, ask the user for another y, and we keep going until y is greater than 0. Another way we can set this up, as written in the flowchart, is we do and we loop until y is greater than 0. So here we would have our input y, and we would have our message box. And we're going to keep doing this until y is greater than 0. The third type is a do while. We would have to rearrange our flow diagram such that instead of being y greater than 0, we would have to change this to y less than or equal to 0, because a do while, you always stay in the loop while a condition is true. So if we switch this conditional to be y less than or equal to 0, that would make this left decision true and the right decision false. We'd say do while, input, y, and message box. We're going to implement this top one here, just a generic do loop. So I'm going over to Excel, Alt F11 to insert a new module. I'm going to call this sub validate. The first step is to dim our variables, and the only thing we have to dim is y. So I'm going to dim y as double. The next step is to enter that loop. So I'm going to have a do, and I just like to put in the end so I don't forget it. We're going to do y is equal to input box, please enter a positive number. So whatever they put into that, it's going to input into y. And the next step is to do our condition. If y greater than 0, then exit do. This is known as a one-way one-liner. So it's a one-way if-then. You don't need to put the end as long as it's placed on the same line. Alternatively, we could write it as exit do, but then we'd have to end if. So that's another way to write it, but it's really easy if we just put it into one line. You can do that for one-way if-thens. If y is greater than 0, then exit do. If we don't exit, then we need a message box that says, please enter a positive number. And then we keep going, and Once we get out of the loop, so this part was the loop, this whole thing is the loop. Once we get out of that, message box y squared. So I'm just going to do message box, the square of your number is, space, close the quotations, and y squared. And what I'm going to do is format this. I like to put in format number y squared comma 2, so it'll be 2 places after the decimal, and that should be it. So the square of your number is, and then it's going to format the y squared to 2 decimal places and output it in a message box. So let's step through this. I'm going to do F8, positive number, I'm going to put in -3 just to show what happens. If -3 or y is greater than 0, so that's false, I'm not going to exit do, so it should just go to the next line. Please enter a positive number. And then it loops back up to the first line. Please enter a positive number. So again, if I put -7, it's going to keep going. Please enter a positive number. And finally, when I put in a positive number, since 7 is greater than 0, we exit do. And then the last line is the square of your number is, and we have 49. And if we're just entering an integer, that format number, it kind of makes things more complex because we're adding those 2 zeros. But in general, if I run this and I have something like 4.5, then it formats it to 2 decimal places. So if you're using really complicated numbers like 3.16725, it's not going to have like 10 places after the decimal. So that is it for input validation.